Welcome to another Poison Pen Zoom event. I am Patrick King. I'm your science fiction and fantasy selector here at the bookstore. Tonight, we are fortunate to start off with a really great science fiction program, a techno thriller written by author Dan Frey. The new book that he's written is called The Future Is Yours, a really exciting book, and he has brought along a friend and expert in quantum mechanics, Dr. Jason Rugolo, who's going to be talking about the book and all of the exciting aspects of it. For those of you who are listening in, I will be your friendly moderator. Feel free to write in any of your comments on Facebook, and I will be moderating and taking questions about 30 to 45 minutes into the program. Feel free to ask whatever questions you want throughout, and I will be glad to relay those over to Dan and Jason. If you want to buy a new copy of The Future Is Yours, Dan has very graciously signed a whole bunch of copies for us. We've got a handful left, and we are glad to send one along the way to you. Dan is a new face in techno thrillers, and his writing is very similar to Michael Crichton and Preston Child, who you all know fairly well. Great at bringing both the thriller aspect along with the science. Dan, Jason, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. And as a Arizona native and fan of your bookstore, this is a great opportunity.
This is really exciting. And now you're living and working in LA, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm in Los Angeles. And this is, I realized because of the pandemic, I haven't been home in the longest I've ever gone since going to Arizona, unfortunately. So
wow,
I miss it.
Well, welcome. Hopefully a little bit of a home away from home, so to speak. I'm going to hide myself so you guys can get to chatting away about the new book. And for those of you at home, feel free to ask any questions. I'll be popping on in a little while. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick.
I really appreciate it. So for everybody out there, I'm Jason. I am a physicist. I would correct that I'm not an expert in quantum mechanics. I would be too embarrassed to say that in front of my colleagues. But I'm happy to pose some science questions to Dan and see if I can get him in hot water.
Won't be too hard, I'm sure.
So Dan, should we just jump into it? I mean, I read the book. I love it. Yeah, I think everybody's going to love it. It might be fun to talk about some of the details.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to.
Do you want to start by just kind of giving the brief of the book, like maybe a couple minutes on what we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, Jace, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, of course.
Jason was is a good friend for many years and was kind of my early reader, science/tech world expert in doing a little bit of proofreading on a very early draft of it. So it's kind of a crazy journey to now be here talking about it in public. So The Future Is Yours, in a nutshell, is a sci-fi tech thriller that takes place today. The book actually starts in February 2021 and it is set in modern day Silicon Valley. So it's not far future sci-fi, it's dealing with believable, realistic technologies in the kind of like entrepreneurial world of startups and Silicon Valley. The main characters are named Ben and Adi, and they're these two guys that are basically best friends from college, went to Stanford together, and they're kind of this classic introvert-extrovert pairing. So Ben is a gregarious, charismatic guy who's kind of the bold, visionary salesman of the company, the Steve Jobs personality. And then Advan, or Adi for short, is an introverted computer engineer who's really the tech side kind of nerdy one who actually makes the technology work. And the two of them get together and they hatch this idea for a startup that's going to create this revolutionary new computer, which through the magic of quantum entanglement is able to connect with itself 1 year into the future. So through this computer that they build, you can go online and basically access the internet 1 year into the future. And the sort of architecture of the story as a whole is basically the kind of prototypical startup story of these two kind of, scrappy guys in their 20s who get together with a big idea and set out to bring it to the world. And so they're on that journey of raising VC money and building a brand and bringing on employees, and sort of the prototypical story told in the social network of Facebook. It's just that the technology that they've built is this sort of sci-fi mindfucky see 1 year into the future computer. And through this process, they start making all of their dreams come true. They get stupid rich. They see the incredibly amazing life that they're going to live. But at the same time, it's also a nightmare come true. And they start realizing that their technology is going to be responsible for basically driving the world off a cliff in the relatively near future. And so they're building the company and realizing their dreams, but at the same time wrestling with all of the ethical implications of what they're doing together.
This is such a cool story, Dan. I want to like figure out how you came up with this, especially the spin on time travel. Like that's a totally new, I've never seen it before, at least. The book itself is written in a really unique way. So it's like an epistolary, like a collection of letters, but it's a digital version of that, where it's actually a collection of congressional transcripts and emails and texts and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that? That was just super cool to me.
Yeah, so the book is written in that form, what I call like a digital epistolary, for a variety of different reasons. So when you read it, you'll see that it's text message conversations, emails. There's a whole portion of it that is basically a slideshow that's kind of like with commentary along the way. There are memes that are part of it. There are blog posts. And I'll talk through a few different reasons, but the most simple one is just that it's fun. It was fun for me to write, and I think that it's fun for people to read. And so kind of every new chapter, new section that you get to is delivered in a different way. And so for me as an author, it was an interesting challenge just to sort of mimic all of these different voices. So, in one section, it's two kind of millennial guys communicating through text and sending each other memes and links and articles, the way that so much of our communication actually happens today. And then in the next, I'm trying to mimic, a legal brief and write in some online, looking up like, what does that visually look like? And what's the stylistic approach? And can I approximate that as closely as possible? So for me, just as a sort of restless creator, there was a fun and interesting challenge to that. And it also serves both kind of the character and theme of the book in an interesting way, because as you can imagine, the book is dealing a lot with the technology industry and the ways in which our lives are increasingly affected and mediated by all of these different technologies. And I think that it's been really fascinating and troubling to see how so much of our communication has been infiltrated by the new means in which we communicate. And, I wrote this book initially about 2 years ago now, but it's been fascinating to see how it's sort of only become more relevant. And especially, in the last year of the pandemic, where we're able to see so few people in person, more and more of our lives are happening in this form, mediated by Zoom. I have like entire relationships that have been reduced to text message for the duration of the last 10 months, because they're just like not close enough to set up a Zoom. And so the book is sort of mirroring the ways in which those technological forms of mediation have reshaped our minds in the way that we communicate, which I think is super fascinating to explore. And it does sort of my, like digital age version of Hemingway had this idea like that a book should be kind of like an iceberg, where you're only seeing the 10% on the surface, but you can intuit and feel the 90% underneath. And I think that with digital forms of communication, that's increasingly true. Like if somebody texts you just like the letter K, they've communicated a lot beyond just like, yes, that's okay with me.
Right.
Depending on the relationship, they're probably communicating, okay, but fuck you, or something
Right.
along those lines. And so getting to
Tell me
those
more about
layers
your
was,
relationships, Dan.
I don't do K. I think that just K as a reply is
It's not allowed.
unacceptable.
Yeah, you got to leave it. You can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that this how you described how communication and mediated communication through technology is just changing us like at a fundamental level. I don't think you could have more timely of a topic. I mean, my mind is exploding right now, right? Like Social Dilemma on Netflix, the riots at the Capitol, like the Twitter, impact on tribalization, and how deplatforming Trump, it like basically made him disappear. Like I don't even. It's like 20 days later, and I forgot he existed, and so I feel like this story it's so relevant to what we're going through right now as a society.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of those threads have sort of like been in the water for a while, and were definitely things that I was kind of tapping into as I first started working on this book. And I think that, I mean, it's amazing to me to see how the Social Dilemma, I think, has taken ideas that were kind of fringe like 4 or 5 years ago and made it completely mainstream, almost taken for granted. For example, like the ways in which social media affects us and sort of influences our behavior and our decisions. I think that, when I first went off of Facebook 5 years ago or something, it felt like a fringe position to take. And now at the same time, we've all like accepted that this idea is true, that we are molded and shaped by these platforms. I think though that it's important to still say, like, mostly we would identify these platforms as shaping other people. I think that, most people in terms of their political stances certainly would be able to point to something like the storming of the Capitol and go, oh, those susceptible idiots have been transformed by technology, but I'm over here just, objectively enjoying everything in my network. And what I really
Right.
hope is that we can start to acknowledge the ubiquity of how much those things are actually affecting everybody as it becomes increasingly just like the water that we swim in. It becomes invisible to us individually relative to our individual lives, but witnessing those transformations hopefully can be a cause for reflection for people individually, to recognize the ways in which their experiences, their values, their relationships are fundamentally being steered by algorithmically driven platforms.
Yeah. I mean, so
Deeply
there's this,
unsettling.
I mean, I love it. This is probably like one of my favorite topics. And, I work in Silicon Valley. I work at a place called X, formerly known as Google X. It's Google's secret research lab. So I'm the head of a
So wait, X
secret
is
project.
X Google X?
X is formerly known as Google X. It's just X now. It's like kind of like a Prince thing, it's just the just the symbol. So we're not allowed to talk about what we do, but basically X is a moonshot factory. The whole idea is we're going to invent and launch what we call moonshot technologies that make the world a radically better place. These tech things that are just going to transform everything. And I'm here as just Jason Rugolo. I'm not representing X. This is just me in my personal life. But one thing we talk about a lot in Silicon Valley is this idea of like this fantastic technical future, right? We're going to invent this thing and it's going to change everything. And usually there's this like utopic delusion that everything is going to be amazing, right? And for those of you that haven't seen The Social Dilemma. It's a documentary on Netflix that goes through how social media is having negative impacts on society. And I think I don't mean to overstate it, Dan, but I think in the future is yours. That's one of the main themes, is kind of the unintended consequences of technology. You know, you think, oh, we're working on this thing that's going to make the world so much better, and then actually, like, the world has its own plans.
Yeah, I mean, unintended consequences is exactly the thing that I think sci-fi has the opportunity to do really well, and I think hasn't always done as well as it could, because in some ways you look at a lot of sci-fi and it assumes sort of a almost like linear connection between the intention of technology and the way that it manifests or plays out into the world. And sort of simplistic treatments of Silicon Valley, a thing that I'm like responding to, sort of have painted, you know, Silicon Valley leaders as the arch cynical, you know, just purely driven by profit. And I think that what you're pointing to is the more interesting reality and ironic aspect of the paradigm that we're living in, which is that there are very genuinely well-meaning, idealistic, brilliant people who are attempting to save the world in a lot of ways. I think that there's, you know, I'm sure you experience this more, you know, steeped in this culture than I do, but going into this and writing something that is largely critical of Silicon Valley culture, my experience meeting people is that they do care about ethics. They do care about building technology that makes a positive impact on the world. The failure to do so has been a short-sighted one, has not been one of ill intentions, but again, to your point, one of unintended consequences. I mean, also,
Yeah.
just since you're here as a like representative of this world, is this accurate to your experience of just the culture in that world?
That's a complicated question to answer, because it really is both, and it's almost like laughingly both. Like, there are some people that are just so good and kind-hearted, and like their, you know, raison d'être is just to do good in the world, and they can make big mistakes. And then there are these other people that are almost like the evil, like the archetype of the, you know, the evil, you know, profit seeking, doesn't give a shit people, and they could invent tech that actually has this huge positive impact. You know, and it's almost this story, or I feel sometimes like a helplessness of not really knowing, you know, the direction of that the technology is going to take is sort of chaotic, and you don't really know like what's going to happen. But then there's this kind of resignation to it, where you also just know that that technology is going to happen. Like, the forces are such that, you know, 2 to 10 years from now, like, this will be possible. And so I'd rather be part of it, as like, I consider myself one of those people that want to do good. So I might as well be part of it and hopefully like figure out how to steer this bottle rocket, you know, towards good instead of towards bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, nobody like wants to be the bad guy. I think that
Right.
one of the things in researching this book, I, you know, just read a lot of books and talked to a lot of people. I think that one of the most interesting stories is the Theranose story. And for anyone who's not familiar, Elizabeth Holmes built this company to make incredibly cheap and efficient and fast blood testing machines. And it turned out to be just like a massive scam. The technology never worked, but she was
Total
getting
fraud.
billions of dollars of investment from all kinds of smart people. And it was just like a smoke screen, but it was getting out into the world, and it became a real problem. That story to me was fascinating because I think she's as close as we get to a Silicon Valley villain, total charlatan, was just like lying through her teeth and driving the truck through barriers to get to market. And at the same time, so I read the book Bad Blood about her, and I think that she actually believed in the technology, and she thought that she was cutting these corners because they needed to get the money and then they would get it working. And yeah, maybe it's been out in the world for 6 months when they have a version that actually works. But she saw herself, she bought into her own hype. And there's like a cognitive dissonance in that story, but one that I think is enabled by the incentives and the myths of Silicon Valley. So for one thing, you have people making money on a scale just unheard of in human history, surpassing, the Industrial Revolution, robber barons that came out of that. It's just on an impossible scale what's happening. Yeah. And so you're going to get people responding to those market concerns and justifying in whatever way they possibly can. And at the same time, there are these figures who, at least 5 years ago, were being hailed as kind of messianic visionaries almost.
Right.
I worked at Airbnb for literally 1 week. It was just for a project. And the kind of cult of the founder that existed there, at least at that time, 7-8 years ago, around Brian Chesky, was just like, what colors does he like? And, what font does he respond to? There was a treatment of these hailing these figures as sort of larger than life deities in a way. And so there's a departure from reality for those individuals that's going to, you get the reality distortion field.
I can guarantee you that the reality distortion field is a real thing. It's a lot of things coming together at once. It's these incredibly strong incentives. I mean, there are billions of dollars to be made. It's a little bit of Machiavellianism. It's just kind of fake it till you make it. We know the tech is here. Like we'll just get over the hump. It's a little bit of cognitive dissonance, like you said. You kind of like believe your own hype. As there's this flywheel that gets going of like you have a story, you get the venture capitalists in, all they do is talk their book. Like they're always just trying to sell whatever equity they're holding to a greater fool, and it's all about going this to be able to dump the equities on the public markets. And that's kind of a carousel you can't hop off of, right? It's like going too fast. If you jump off, like you'll be flung into your death or something. And so I guess, the ethical question, it's something that some companies, I think, focus on almost to a fault, and then other companies kind of don't give a shit, frankly. And I think the best framing of it was actually in The Social Dilemma with Jaron Lanier, who's he's kind of a figure in Silicon Valley. He's been around for a really long time. And he said, look, if you're not paying for it, you're the product, right? That's kind of a meme that people are starting to understand. And in the context of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and most of Google's business, by you being the product, it means they're advertising to you, right? And they are selling kind of their understanding of who you are and what you'll respond to advertisers, and that's how they make their money. And Jaron makes this amazing point. The only way that you can be useful to them and they can sell you to advertisers is if they can change you, if they can make you change your decisions. So now put yourself in the shoes of a large company that wants to do good in the world, and fundamentally they have to change you in order to do that. Well, we all change all the time, and sometimes we change for the better and sometimes we change for the worse, right? And so a company can say, I'm in the business of changing people and influencing people, and so I'm going to try to influence them to be better. Or they could say, I'm in the business of influencing people and I don't care, right? And I just want to make money. And so now you have billions of dollars on the line, and it's like, do you trust a capitalist corporation to say, I'm going to forfeit X amount of profit to make sure we're only helping people. We're only changing people for the better. That's a hard question to confront.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I mean, and speaks again to the question of incentives, and brings up the way in which a business plan becomes almost the sort of like first and primary ethical decision that gets made. I think that, you can look at YouTube as a pretty great kind of case study for how this works. I mean, YouTube is ad driven. So on a very simple level, like television, the more people watch, the more ads they see, the more money that YouTube makes. And they're, as a platform, essentially agnostic. Anybody can put up video, anybody else can watch it. Just by being the intermediary of that, they've got a business. As long as they keep some hate speech off of there, it seems like they're sort of morally in the clear. But going back to your point about unintended consequences, starting around 2012, you get the algorithm improving. And basically, the algorithm is no longer just looking for kind of clickbaity content that people will click on one thing, but then it might lose them. It's like doing millions and billions of tests to see like what's sticky, what keeps people engaged. Still pretty like morally neutral. It just turns out that a thing that's really good at keeping people morally engaged is political content that's like a little bit beyond where they normally sit politically. And so you get the birth of this rabbit hole effect enabled by an AI that is nothing like HAL 9000. It's something like Skynet. There's no nefarious plan. It's just able to observe human behavior and guide people to like one video further that's like, I hadn't thought of it quite that way. And it steers people like on this slide to content that fundamentally over time radicalizes people. And so, and this is where we get the birth of QAnon, and we get these increasingly radical strains of American politics that a lot of us are looking at today going like, who the fuck believes this stuff? But one of the main avenues that has enabled this is technological. And it's interesting how even so 2018 YouTube started to recognize this problem and attempted to correct the algorithm and sort of like to sort of curb this issue. And Facebook was doing the same thing in the wake of the 2016 election. But it had almost like taken root in such a way that now people are in these communities. Facebook favors the group thing and is feeding you content from within your network. But then you have all these people who are in networks that are full of other people who believe these fringe and radical beliefs. And so, back 8 years, 9 years, YouTube didn't set out to create a radicalizing algorithm. It's just the unintended consequence that grows out of a seemingly neutral thing. And so there's a failure to think through how it can actually interact with human beings and human nature.
Yeah, you're so right, Dan. And one of the kind of ironic things about this is that, I know a lot of people that work at Google. I know people that work at Facebook. We all talk about it in kind of the same way, or at least most of them that I know. There's this dilemma where, it's like what people want, like what they click on is not what's good for them. And so, like, do we kind of start enacting these paternalistic policies where we're like, actually we're gonna make these decisions for you, like you don't need another QAnon video right now, like we're gonna like show you a Hello Kitty video or something, something that they clearly don't want, or so where does the responsibility come in? And this brings us, I think, perfectly to one of the main themes of your book. As you said earlier, the book is, the context is this technology that allows you to look into the future through the internet, right? And so you can kind of see what's going to happen. And from the onset, you might look at that and think, this is an amazing technology. I mean, I could pitch it right now on how that's going to change everything for the better. It's going to make the world a radically better place. We're going to be able to predict droughts and famines. We're going to reorganize resources to optimize everything perfectly across the economy. We're going to make sure that, joblessness no longer is a thing because we know what we need to educate people for. You could say all the good things. And in fact, that is exactly how it would go if like somebody was pitching this in the Valley. And instead, a lot of other things can happen, and I think that's what you explore brilliantly. So the total tantalizing question is, if you could look a year into the future, would you? Right. So would you? That's the best question. Would you, if you had that option right now, Dan? Would you do it?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I've thought about it a lot because I've kind of bounced this off a lot of people and encountered a lot of people who say like, why would I want that? Like, I don't want to see the future. And so to answer it, I think about when the iPhone first started becoming popular. And at that time, I saw other people that had it, and I had totally the response of like, I don't need that. Like, I don't need my email accessible to me all of the time. And this is more trouble, and I don't need to spend that money. Yep. And I think for me, it was within 3 or 4 months of that starting to become normal in my social world that if other people had it, I wanted it. And so there's a access to information element that if we sort of look at how this goes historically, it only moves in one direction. And it's nearly impossible for people to sort of willingly abstain from adopting information access technologies. Fundamentally, there are advantages that come with adoption. There are advantages to your job prospects, your performance, how many people you're able to meet, how efficient you can be in a techno-capitalist sense, obviously.
How entertained you are.
Yeah, exactly. Like, boredom doesn't need to be a thing anymore. And so I think that the most honest answer I could give is like, I would initially resist this and I would come around. And I would come around as though like not even acknowledging that I had changed my mind, just saying like, yeah, I always wanted this. This is cool. And then immediately like there would be other people going like, well, where's my thing that I can look 2 years in the future? There's an immediate escalation question that it raises.
Yeah.
Would you want this?
Would I want it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would want it like before everybody else has it. It would like give me some kind of edge, and would make me feel like powerful, like I have agency about, directing the development of technology, kind of being the one who's able to make those choices about, whether or not technology ends up being a good thing or a bad thing. I would totally want it.
Yeah. I mean, to also just sort of like get into an aspect of the book and why part of the fun of the book is it's just like a little bit of a mind puzzle. The question that obviously comes up when you say like you have a thing that enables you to see the future is, can you change it? That has to be the sort of next thing on your mind, because if not, then what's the point? It becomes frustrating. And so the book certainly begins with a paradigm in which what the characters see in the future is impossible to change. And they're doing all kinds of experiments to test that and see if it's possible to redirect it. And this is a whole kind of like strain of storytelling that I'm tapping into that's in a lot of science fiction, but that goes back to like Oedipus Rex. Oedipus Rex is largely a prophecy story. Gets this prophecy, you're going to kill your father and sleep with your mother. fuck no, it's the last thing in the world that I'm going to do, through the efforts to steer himself away from that future, ends up causing it without realizing it because he doesn't actually know his parentage, and discovers that and appropriately gouges his own eyes out, refuses to take in any more from the world. I think that there's this subgenre, is sort of how I look at it, of fatalistic, locked into the future stories. And that's kind of what I'm playing in. And I think that it's really resonant today because of this. To go back to what we were talking about, there's this sense of the forward momentum of technology. Kind of like you said, it's coming. I want to have it and be steering the ship, because I can't change the fact that that's the direction that the world is headed. And so the book, through this kind of sci-fi conceit, is playing on this sense of fundamental helplessness that I think a lot of us have in the face of a world that's changing so incredibly fast, and that we feel like the best we can do is just try to keep up.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many feelings there, right? There's this hopelessness, there's this lack of control. There's also this like kind of excitement, because on the day to day, like, you want it, you're consuming it. Everybody wants the iPhone 12 Pro Max, whatever, like, and so you kind of want to know what's next, but then there's this growing despair. And, one of the things that I love the most about the book is, it's your canvas is technology and technofuturism and this kind of sci-fi angle of how the world is changing. But I feel like what the book is really about is how it affects the people, and their relationships. It starts out with this beautiful friendship between Ben and Adi. And well, I don't want to give too much away about the book, but it's so brilliant how you develop these characters and their relationship, and how their relationship kind of evolves along with the technology and their business success. Was that an important thing to you when you were writing, to like get the human side of it?
Yeah, I mean, that was when it became an actual book, and everything that we've talked about up to this point, like, I could have written some essays, and there are probably people more qualified to write smart essays about this. But yeah, so the human element of it, I don't think that it's a spoiler to say they don't stay best friends for the duration of the entire book. But the question of the book really becomes, can their friendship, and can Ben's marriage to his wife Layla, who Adi is also possibly in love with, survive all of this as well? And wrapped up in that, there was something that I was really kind of interested in exploring, especially, I look at a lot of these Silicon Valley success stories, Jobs and Wozniak, look at the Social Network story, a fictionalized sort of version of Mark Zuckerberg's narrative. And there's this question that it poses of, can this friendship, this human connection, survive the journey of success? Because you get people that are brought together by their friendship, by love, ultimately, and then it's out of that love that they try to do something amazing together. It's just that it turns out that you look at every band in the world, and like, success doesn't bring people closer together. And there's this really sad irony to that, to watching these two guys, because I think that one of the things that it brings up is kind of the question of unconditional love. And I think especially in, male friendships, where there's this deep connection that is not always articulated, it can become attractive, for me and you to just want to dig a ditch or build a company or something as a way for us to express how we feel about each other. Because we're not comfortable talking about it. But then you get into a paradigm where you go like, wait, do you only care about me because I'm good at digging or useful to your company? And the intertwining of the personal and the professional can just bring out the worst in people, and is a part of this world, this Silicon Valley world, and this story world in particular, that I think is very acute, because more and more we're living in a time where our jobs are not just like, we leave the door and grab our lunch pail and now we're in work mode, and we come
Right.
back and take off our coat and we're in home and personal mode. We're increasingly like blurring the lines between those two things. And
Absolutely.
there can be great that comes out of working with your friends, your loved ones, and sharing passions with the people in your family. But the crossover between those and the ways in which our lives, the boundaries get blurred, is something that has a downside to it, and that I was really interested in exploring in this book.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. Just, some perspective for what it's like to be in Silicon Valley right now. I mean, if our father's generation was, 6:30 a.m. off to work, briefcase, suit and tie, like professional, and then go home, like you said, put the briefcase down, and now you're in family mode. Silicon Valley now is like the opposite of that. It's like, if you're not dropping F-bombs at work, wearing hoodies and like shooting the shit most of the time, like you're kind of weird. You're just like, why are you working so hard? Like, work smarter, not harder, like that kind of, it's just so casual, and like, and you're supposed to be friends and love each other and be cool and like go surfing and, hang out. And it's funny because, I believe that people have not changed that much in the last 30 years. It's just the way we act is changing, and the connection between kind of how we act and what we think is normal, and these very technologies that we're developing, that, like these social networking technologies, these information distribution technologies, the way those things kind of influence what we think is normal and how we're supposed to be, there's this like kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of it all. And I definitely wonder if it's kind of a fad, if like a decade or two from now, people be like, okay, like that was the Wild West of, information revolution. It was like some crazy shit happened. Larry and Sergey invented PageRank, and like the internet really started, and there was like 2 decades, and then like Trump got elected and the Capitol was stormed, and like total mayhem. And like now we're going to go back to being professionals, and like we have rules and guidelines.
We'll see.
I think,
I mean, yeah, I think that you're bringing up kind of the ways in which, like, on a anthropological level, we evolve so slowly, but on a social level, we evolve fast, and on a technological level, that social evolution is just like cranked through the roof in a way.
Yeah.
And our caveman selves are struggling to catch up in a lot of ways, and are just really, fundamentally not equipped to adapt to new norms, to process new information that quickly. And so, we struggle to keep up.
And it's like there's a new one every week, right? Like with GameStop and the meme stocks, like the meme buying of stocks. That wasn't a thing 2 weeks ago. Like nothing changed, or 3 weeks ago. Nothing changed, right? It was just Wall Street Bets on Reddit figured out that it was possible to attack hedge fund short positions by like collective action, and then all of a sudden the entire world was talking about it. And it was like all the world was talking about for, I don't know, 7 days.
I mean, I think that the GameStop story is so interesting because you don't have like a brand new technology that's enabled it. You have the confluence of 2 technologies and 2 communities, really. So on the one hand, you have a message board, which is one of Reddit, which is one of the oldest things that the internet can do. Right. And then you have Robinhood, which is an app that just makes it more accessible for more people to day trade, basically. And then as a result of those technologies combined with a particular ethos on a certain Reddit community, you get, the world's first crowdsourced short squeeze in history.
Stonks.
Yeah. And the thing that honestly like blows my mind about it as sort of a, observer of culture on Reddit, I would say, is I watched it happen, and then the memes became about how okay, so anybody who doesn't know, like real quick, a bunch of people on a subreddit called Wall Street Bets saw that hedge funds were shorting GameStop, a brick and mortar retailer that by all means like should be decreasing in value. They fought that shorting position by all agreeing to buy a ton of GameStop. The stock's value went up from about $40 to about $400, 1,000% growth in a matter of days, wildly disproportionate to what it's worth. And then the thing that most people aren't talking about is the people in that community sort of all shouting to each other on Reddit are saying, hold your positions, hold on to this stock. You have these people that have effectively could have made 1,000% in a week, but they're, for some sort of like ethical virtue signaling reason, holding the stock as though, even though everyone knows that it's an incredible bubble, it's like wildly against their selfish interests. And so they both broke the market in terms of how it works for these hedge funds, and they have dissolved the normal, just very simple selfish interest that should drive investment behavior. And then slowly the value collapsed, and all those people were kind of left holding the bag and missed out on a chance to make a bunch of money.
And just like, again, on this point of unintended consequences, right? Just like when Reddit started or Robinhood started, nobody was thinking about, meme crowdfunded short squeezes. It just kind of happens, and we're left here kind of just laughing about it. It seems like the perfect time to write a book about the unintended consequences of advanced technology development.
Yeah. So for we've actually got a couple questions on that from the audience. So I thought I'd jump on and touch on those. So Claude was wanting to know specifically, Dr. Rugolo, does X have a program for evaluating possible means for misusing or abusing the innovative technology that you work on?
Well, so I can't talk about X and X processes specifically. But I can just share more generally about kind of how people think about technology development, or at least, let's say, how people that I would align with think about technology development in the Valley. We do a lot of thinking about unintended consequences, and it's kind of scary because we're very creative people. We can come up with a lot of crazy ways things can go wrong. And there's this kind of gut feeling that you have to develop of like the probability of all the different outcomes, and then like some sort of way, like metric of like how bad each of those outcomes would be, and then you do this calculus in your head of the risk weighted goodness and badness summed up to decide, like, is this something we should do? And I don't think that because technology development and human behavior is so chaotic, I don't think that anybody has the right answer. But I do think it's super important to think about it, because I think, as I said before, Dan, like, if you believe that technology can make the world a radically better place, which I think is undeniably true, and you believe that technology, like what is possible with technology, is going to happen no matter what, it's just a matter of time, then it is the right ethical decision to be the person that's making it. Because if you just kind of put your hands over your eyes and walk away, then somebody else is going to do it. and then you have no say in it. Which I think is, Dan, I think that's why the question of like, would you want to know the future is such a good one.
Yeah, and so also this is something that inspired an element of the book. So one of the things that I sort of thought through in writing the book was, as we talked about, like I'm coming at this from the perspective of two characters that are idealistic and that genuinely want what's best for the world. And certainly, like if you imagine you have the ability to see the future, you could just hold that for yourself and get absurdly rich and, invest well, just this technology plus Robin Hood equals billionaire.
The greatest meme stock of all time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But instead, the book is about these guys who decide that they want to make a product that's available to everyone. They want to share it with the entire world, which is entirely born out of this sense that if everybody has it, then whatever sort of potential for evil might exist is obviated. The playing field is leveled in some ways. And then the book explores how that utopian vision ends up in some ways being significantly worse and causing even bigger problems. And so I think that it speaks to the ways in which there's definitely like a horizon in terms of our predictive ability. And particularly that horizon exists simply because of the human element, because it's fundamentally impossible to know how people are going to interact with this technology.
So Jordan is asking, what do both of you see as the biggest threat to American society today in terms of technology, something that could bring about a terrifying, the future is yours like disaster?
Ooh. You want to take that, Dan?
I want to hear what you think.
Terrifying technology. This is something I could talk for hours about. So it's kind of hard to just pick one. I'm sort of terrified of all sorts of different technologies. I would say the most immediate thing is kind of a boring old one, which would be, nuclear physics and nuclear explosions. I think we're not over that one yet. But I wouldn't call that advanced technology. It's just kind of like known tech. Like most people know how to build nuclear missiles at this point. The kind of unknown technologies that are just on the brink that could really transform the world and make the world much worse or much better would be things like being able to design biology, for example. So imagine if you could make a molecule that's designed specifically for a person that you could administer to that person, and it would cure them of some disorder or disease that they have. It's a magic molecule that can rid your body of cancers. In fact, we know that this is going to be possible. We just don't quite know how to do it yet. And it's right on the verge of possible because we now have design control over DNA. We understand what DNA is, and we're just now figuring out the correlation between, genotype and phenotype and how to program biological outcomes. The terrible future of that is you make a molecule that, kills all of the people of a specific race, or, and you just spread it across the world or something. Like it's like the perfect weapon. Or you make a molecule that damages people in a way that manipulates them. You remove people's sense of hearing or something, like you could just imagine like that level of power as being totally terrifying. I could go on, Dan. You probably have something.
You got some real evil ideas over there. You and your friends cook up on a coffee break or whatever.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm sort of thinking about the most in the immediate future, partly thinking about this book that I wrote and a lot that I see happening in the world, is the potential for technology to influence human thinking and behavior. I think that I've already experienced a sense of questioning my own free will and agency as a result of seeing how these platforms have realigned people's thoughts, beliefs, behaviors. And that's purely accidental. And there's so much data now that's out there, sort of ready to be tapped and harnessed for how human behavior is manipulable in these ways, that I think that it's very possible that we could get bad actors using that to try to control human behavior in more nefarious ways than have happened, and we wouldn't even know that it was happening. And because so much of our lives are mediated and we're receiving so much media, and so much of our communication is monitored and sold and could be impinged upon, there is the possibility that essentially we could be, to use a blunt term, brainwashed or mind controlled in a deliberate way, and that we would never know that it had even happened.
So you mean like a demagogue could kind of force tens of thousands of people to try to take over the United States Capitol?
Yeah, it's funny is like what we have in reality is not like sci-fi evil plots. We have just like the bizarro dumb version of them with like a guy with horns and
sitting in the speaker's chair.
Yeah, like how just so much more weird of a version than anyone would have written.
So maybe, sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
Oh, I was just going to say, Jenny Frey was wondering which one of you is Addie and which one of you is Ben.
Dan is definitely Ben. I mean, he's the writer. Look at him. He's beautiful.
No, neither no, I would say, like, having written it, we were debating this before we started. I think we might be like two oddies talking with each other. I don't know that, but Jason, you're a boss of a bunch of people. You are the charismatic visionary of a moonshot venture.
No, I'm a weirdo. I'm a physicist at heart. It is hard and painful every day to like show up and actually talk to people. Although I think I might be a Layla.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, she's a badass.
And ethically troubled like you. So
yeah.
True friendship. So Darth Breakfast, probably one of my favorite Facebook names. He says, Dan, love the read. Can you give us any hints about the upcoming HBO series?
Sure. I mean, I can't say a whole lot. So we're in development to produce an adaptation for HBO Max. What I'll say is, so there's a director who's on board to direct the pilot and produce, named Anish Chaganty. He did a film called Searching, which, if anybody has seen, is truly incredible. It takes place entirely on computer screens and is all like mediated through text messages and interactions. And so one of the unique challenges in thinking about how to adapt this book was how to preserve the form of it, that it's in all of these different stylistic mediated elements. And so in translating that to screen, without like totally diving into how we're going to do it, I just can't imagine a better director than the one that we've found. And in working with him, his producing partners, Sev and Natalie, and then Matt Reeves's company as well, we've kind of found an approach that is visually something that I've never seen on TV before, and I think is going to be really cool. I'll just say
That's
that.
so exciting. I can't wait to see that.
Yeah.
So I've got to ask, Dan, is the techno thriller going to be your thing, you think? Is this going to be, you somewhat had it within The Refuge, obviously The Future of Yours, an incredibly exciting book. with the next project that you're going to be working on? Do you think it'll be another technological thriller?
So I would say I'm really excited to write another tech thriller. You allude to Michael Crichton, who's just like childhood sweet spot hero of mine, and I'm thrilled to do some other Michael Crichton-y things. But the next book that I'm working on is a different direction of nerdery, and is sort of a contemporary fantasy book in the vein of Neil Gaiman or N.K. Jemisin's most recent book, The City We Became, but looking to do something in terms of form that's similar to The Future Is Yours, that is sort of a multimedia, textural, different elements coming together to tell a fantasy story, which is something that I've seen even less than a sci-fi version. So I'm really excited about that. I'm doing that with Del Rey, the publisher of this book, and I've just had a phenomenal experience working with them so far.
They are a great publisher. I mean, you're really lucky. I mean, in terms of this book coming out, getting an HBO show actually before the book has even released, which is amazing. I think that that is an incredible acknowledgement to how exciting and interesting this book is, and it brings up a lot of great thoughts about technology and where we're going and where we're headed. I loved the bringing in of quantum mechanics and, you know, getting that idea that reality is more what would be, you know, three-dimensional rather than two. We often think of, you know, going from point A to point B, and making us think about reality being in that third dimension. And that's really interesting, the whole quantum mechanics spin. So you've done a great job, and clearly you've got a great friend in Jason here. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for having us. This is a lot of fun. And Jason, you were amazing. Thanks for having
I
a
can't
chat
wait
with me that we would have just had sitting around the fire or something.
Exactly. I can't wait to get my copy. I mean, I read the, you know, we've been talking about this for a long time. And I read an early copy, but I haven't seen it, and it's changed so much. I'm so excited to read the final one. So I already ordered mine.
As well, you should. Everybody
Yeah.
should go out and read it and purchase it wherever they can. Obviously, if you want Dan's signature, you know, you can order through the Poison Pen. But there's plenty of other great places to buy your books and just support your local authors. So we really appreciate it. Guys, thank you so much.
Of course.
Thanks so
Dan.
much for having us.
Thanks,
All right.
See you later. Bye.
We'll see you guys soon. All right.
All right.
Take care.